There's a sequence of events in a video game that I want to talk about. It's from the very early parts of The Outer Worlds, this Fallout New Vegas in space game that I'm sure you've heard something about already. I really enjoyed this game. It was probably the one I enjoyed playing the most in 2019. I think it presents some opportunities for excavation, some opportunities for cultural criticism that I think we should be aware of. And since we're talking about video games, I guess I should say some very minor spoiler warnings for the first few hours of this game. I'm going to be as vague as possible, but just in case. The protagonist of The Outer Worlds literally falls from space after having spent some time in a state of suspended animation. The protagonist is given a mission from someone after landing on a planet, landing on this planet in close proximity to this particular industrial town. As it turns out, this town was founded by and is run by a very large corporation, one that specializes in manufacturing a large volume of cheap goods. This particular company is a subsidiary of a military defense corporation. The CEO of this defense corporation sits on a board of a larger holding company. This holding company is run by a panel of 10 of the most powerful CEOs in this star system. They act as something of a de facto government for the region. And the town that this protagonist happens upon is a very small component of this very large and vast late capitalist science fiction universe. The protagonist, they've never been to this town, they've never even been to this planet. When they arrive, they become embroiled in a conflict that was going on long before they even got there. As you can imagine, it is pretty hard to live in this company industrial town.
What happened, you ask? What always happens when you're dreaming. I woke up. I just didn't have the brains for it. Asked too many questions. Wasn't suited to the work.
Working conditions at the primary place of employment, a cannery, are very poor.
Yep. Got my mitt stuck in a rotor wheel. Shredded my wrist up real good. Conrad went and sewed up my hand, but I couldn't do much about the pain. Boss was real generous to me, though. Got myself a 5% discount on Zero G Brew. After the second bottle, the only pain I feel is emotional.
Because of this, some of the workers in this town have decided to leave, and in doing so they establish a separatist community that quite plainly appears to be founded on more egalitarian and sustainable principles, a better place to live for everyone. Now, as you move through the beginning of this story, each of these communities tasks you with sabotaging the other. And without giving it away, let's say you sabotage the other community by flipping a switch. One side takes the electrical power from the corporate-owned town and routes it to the separatists. The other takes the power from the separatists and routes it back to the company town, forcing one party or the other to abandon their location, potentially defecting to the other and succumbing to the numerous dangers outside. One group gets power, the other loses power. And you must make this decision to forward the story. I won't say how that happens, but you have to. If you want to move the plot forward, you need to make a choice. Flip the switch one way or the other. Discussion of these events in this game have focused on the limited dimension of moral decision making, supporting this group over that group. Now, maybe it's just me.
Got my mitt stuck in a rotor wheel. The only pain I feel is emotional.
I didn't have a lot of difficulty making the decision itself, so I find that less compelling and less interesting. It was pretty cut and dry. Instead, I would rather focus on the role of this protagonist, a figure that literally drops out of the sky in order to move forward a standing conflict between two dissenting parties. What I've found is that the outsized role that the protagonist plays in the early narrative of The Outer Worlds represents the limitations of our imagined solutions to deeply material problems. Through all of this, we can see that a conceptualization of our contemporary society, our contemporary moment, present themselves in various types of popular culture, including video games. Culture that is both displayed and interpreted through a narrow perception of only how things are and not how things could be. The dominant ideology is so powerful, so far-reaching, that even within the depths of space in this coded science fiction adventure game, the furthest reaches of our imagination produce the most familiar of interpretations. Shitty conditions are only changed by an all-encompassing, benevolent, passing figure who exists largely outside of that particular material space, who are then awoken from within it, and then who dramatically change it, and then ultimately press on elsewhere as the primary change agent of society. Rather than act as some kind of a conduit from below, rather than empowering the underclasses to free themselves, to throw off the shackles of their corporate oppressors, and so on and so forth. This radical singular change agent, cast in the image and representative of the dominant ideology, comes in and solves the problem for us. And through this, they act as a sealant on our revolutionary imagination by forwarding these constructed bourgeois subjectivities. Basically meaning that they're pressing upon us this accepted fact that only powerful individual actors emerge from history to move the action forward, from outside rather than from below or within. The protagonist is a mediocre satisfaction that we get to glean from a world that is governed by capitalist realism. When we feel anxious about how small and powerless on our own that we feel in a very big and intimidating world, anxieties over our singularity, over our atomized existence, the general feelings of alienation and rejection that we feel from the society in which we live, the society where we work, but we don't actually own anything. We work for an hourly wage, we rent our housing, and so on. When we feel the pressures of these anxieties, these protagonists and their roles as the chief historical agent, they act as pressure release valves. They make us feel better about the shitty conditions that we find ourselves in, and they make us hope for something more theological rather than material to come and fix this. They place a fundamental distance between ourselves, the way that we see and perceive the world, and two very important points. The first of these is that the only way that these central figures become change agents in history is by forwarding a will that is larger than just their own when they want to fundamentally change things. The second point being that the difficulty and the pain and the violence that come with radical structural change are not just anxieties and fears to be eased by the decisions of a grand protagonist and to be rejected by the dominant culture as gaudy, as inappropriate, as inconceivable, but rather they are realities to be grappled with. The protagonist represents a version of the end of history set in space, a capitalist dystopia whose liberal ideology is so bloated. The imagined solutions to the material conditions of this world still take on the paradoxes of the liberal order. The primacy of the individual displaces collective identities while masking its own odious contradictions, restrictions, and limitations. I would like to suggest that when we play games, that we begin wresting our imagination of a better future out of the hands of capitalist realism. We can combat this meaningless, symbolic exchange by creating something of a dialogue between our social space of leisure in games, this space of entertainment and fun and relaxation, and we can bridge this with a constructive anti-capitalist cultural critique of games. Basically, we can have our cake and we can eat it too, way I see it. I think there's a lot of potential here. I mean, it is a marathon, this run toward the light at the end of the long, dark tunnel that is the end of history. And we're probably going to get some blisters. But I mean, the potential pain and difficulty in growth and change don't overshadow radical possibilities for me. If you want to talk about any of this, you can come over to Twitch, we can have a discussion, and you can check back here soon.
Only pain I feel is emotional.